Hello, I am attempting to make the world's fastest video that explains the debate between George Schuyler and Langston Hughes regarding the specificity and distinctiveness of African American art. So, of course, this is our Blackboard page, and I will show you really quickly what we have for week 2. The first thing I want you to consider for MLK Day is Alicia Keys and Beyonce's versions of Lift Every Voice and Sing, the African American anthem. I do want you to take this survey about stress, and you can also see here that I created annotated copies of the Schuyler and Hughes essay, just to give you an idea of how to write on documents and annotate documents to create more focused and active reading. So, more importantly, I also created a too long to read list about Hughes and Schuyler. Now, one of the first things I checked out was I did notice that there's a bio in the information about Hughes, but nothing about Schuyler. He is kind of a forgotten novelist of the Harlem Renaissance, and he was also a fairly important journalist. But his less popular position that argues against the concept of racial essentialism didn't survive the Harlem Renaissance, or perhaps because of that, his art didn't survive the Harlem Renaissance in the same way that the work of Hughes did. So essentially, Schuyler says that, quote, new art forms expressing the peculiar psychology of the Negro were about to flood the market. In short, the art of Homo Africanus was about to electrify the waiting world. Skeptics patiently waited. They still wait. And he's being very sarcastic here when he says Homo Africanus, because that suggests that people from Africa are a subspecies of humanity. And he really, first and foremost, argues against that concept. So he shows suspicion about wealthy white patrons who long for the, quote, scare quote, sexual energy of art that resembles Picasso's African period. And here are some of Picasso's African masks that kicked off the primitive movement in modern art in the 19 teens because of a pseudo-scientific belief that people from the so-called primitive races who were less civilized than Anglo-Saxons or Europeans had a primal connection to their bodies and sexuality that Christianity, civilization, and Anglo-Saxon rationality erases from the human psyche. Now, I have all of those terms in scare quotes because this is a racist idea. However, as was the case with Lothrop Stoddard, we have sources who tell us that primitive races are closer to their sexuality. And here is this 1916 publication from Sanger Brown, a medical doctor who treats psychiatric disorders that come from sexual proximity to primitive races. And I say that with a little sarcasm because I know it's bizarre, but this is the belief system people are worried about. Jazz is going to make young girls fall from grace and lose their virginity, and primitive races are going to hypersexualize the world. Of course, this is a highly ironic point, considering that many people still alive in this historical moment are survivors of slavery, and particularly the rape culture and sexual violations of slavery. We'll see a little bit more about that when we read Their Eyes Are Watching God. Sanger tells us that superstitions survive, and he's talking specifically about sexual superstitions and the ideas of fertility and phallic worship. These superstitions survive because although they shock the views of enlightened members of community, they are still in harmony with the thoughts and feelings of others, who, though they are drilled by their betters into an appearance of civilization, remain barbarians or savages at heart. And if you look at the longer version of the document, he is specifically talking about people of African descent. He then reminds his readers that people who have the opportunity of knowing better, who are exposed to better ideas, forming in the upper stratum, which is the Anglo-Saxon part of white society, those better ideas have not filtered from the highest to the lowest minds. The filtration is slow. They might never get there. Essentially, he's making very dangerous claims about hypersexuality among people of African descent. So, Schuyler's retort to these racist ideas is that there is no essential difference between black and white. He goes so far as to say that people of African descent are lamp black Anglo-Saxons, and he says when we look at the art, and here's a visual art example, such as Meta Warwick Fuller's sculpture. She was a student of Rodin. She has studied in the best French schools, and although this sculpture is called Ethiopia Rising, Meta Warwick Fuller's greatness as a sculpture parallels Rodin's. It has nothing particularly different that comes from her African descent. Schuyler fears caricatures. He mentions Lothrop Stoddard and the idea of racial essentialism as justification for unequal treatment, and he insists that it is education environment rather than the white supremacist myth of inescapable differences between black and white that creates any differences we might acknowledge in black art. Hughes, Langston Hughes, on the other hand, did receive lots of money from an eccentric white woman who made him call her godmother. Hurston also shared this godmother, and they wrote letters to each other that are kind of amusing to me because they talk about godmother, and she was a pain in the ass, long story short. So Hughes points out that this vogue of white people suddenly paying attention to black art is okay because it was about time black people got credit for something. And Hughes insists that jazz and the blues are some of the inherent expressions of black life in America. And he refers to contrast the image of the lamp black Anglo-Saxon to the eternal tom-tom beating in the Negro, the eternal tom-tom beating in the Negro soul. The tom-tom of revolt against weariness in a white world, a world of subway trains and work, work, work. The tom-tom of joy and laughter, and pain swallowed in a smile. So he's mentioning here that what black people bring to the United States that white people don't possess is the ability to find joy and warmth and persevere in spite of racist circumstances. Negative images, violence, brutality, all of the things we talked about last week with white supremacy. He thinks the problem is simply that middle-class blacks are too bourgeois or bougie to align themselves with working-class black people who are the purveyors and creators of jazz and the blues and some of these new forms that Hughes advocates. So here is a photograph of Hughes by Carl Van Vechten, one of the other wealthy, successful white people who was obsessed with the Harlem Renaissance. Van Vechten wrote a novel as well as created many photographs of Harlem Renaissance figures. And I will say this word for the first and last time this semester because it's the title of Van Vechten's novel, Nigger Heaven. Van Vechten very much exulted in the idea of primitivism, and he might have taken it so far as to make it a racist idea, but that's another topic for another class. So here is one of Van Vechten's images of Hughes, Van Vechten's image of Zora Neale Hurston, and one of Van Vechten's images of Bessie Smith. And you will note that her direct visual eye contact with the viewer in the photograph makes her seem more direct, unabashed, possibly even inviting with her arms one arm akimbo, the other arm kind of open to embrace. And there, you might find something in this visual image that suggests that Bessie Smith is a little bit more of the wild woman that supposedly shaped the blues and embarrassed that Philadelphia middle-class woman to whom Hughes refers. Hughes ends by saying that the art of Aaron Douglas could only have come from an African American. And this is a study from one of Douglas's murals. If you look in Art Store, you can find many amazing Aaron Douglas images. And this is from an extensive series that Aaron Douglas made called Toussaint Louverture. And of course, Toussaint Louverture was one of the leaders of the Haitian Revolution. So in addition to the connection to folk heroes that we might find in Hughes and possibly Aaron Douglas's version of Black art, there certainly are references to jazz and unashamed remembrances of slavery, but also this kind of global connection and insight to places like Haiti, the first free Black nation, the first truly free nation in the Western Hemisphere. So in the interest of keeping this short, I am going to leave you here, and I hope you have a great week.